In this section, you will learn how to integrate any database to your application, and then we are going to see how to create a new user and get a user from the database. So let's begin. First thing first, let's go install the MySQL database. So in Google search bar, specify download MySQL. Now we're going to use this MySQL installer. So click on it and then scroll down, download this version 8.0.40. And now here click on no thanks, just start my download, and it will start the downloading. Wait for a few minutes. Now successfully downloaded the MySQL installer file. Let's go to the location wherever it is stored. Now double click on this file. This is the MySQL installer screen, and here you need to choose the setup type. So click on full because we are going to install server and client both, and then click on next, and it is going to install the following product: MySQL Server, Workbench, Shell, Router. Let's click on execute to install all these components. Wait for few minutes, it will install all the component. After installing all this component, click on next, and then again click on next, and here choose the config type as a development computer, and then you can see here the port for this MySQL server is 3306. And now click on next, and then here keep authentication method as a default method or recommended method. Then click on next, and here you need to specify the password for your SQL. In this case, I'm going to keep the simple password. So here I'm going to add a new user that I will use, and I'm going to name the user as a coding with KS. And the role is a DB admin, and I can also specify password here. So again, specify password for this user, and then click on OK. User is added, and click on next. And now again click on next, and then here choose server file permission as a default permission. Click on next, and then click on execute. Now all the configuration applied successfully to the MySQL. Click on finish, and then again click on next, and here we are going to set up the MySQL router. So everything is default. Click on finish, and then again click on next, and here you can specify username and password. So I will keep the username as a root and specify the password, and then click on check to see if it is working or not. And as you can see here, connection succeed, and then click on next. Now again click on execute to apply the configuration, and then click on finish. Then again click on next. Now we have successfully installed the MySQL on our computer. Click on finish to close this window. As soon as you click on finish button, a window open. This is the workbench, and that allows us to interact with the database graphically. So using this GUI, we can interact with the database. So here you can see this is the MySQL connection, and as you know, the username is root and it is running on localhost 3306. Click on this and specify the password that you have configured while installing the MySQL, and then click on OK. And now this is the interface of MySQL workbench, and here in this area you can execute all your SQL or MySQL query. So for example, here if you specify show databases, and then you click on this icon, then it's going to execute this query. So click on this, and now you can see it shows all the database that exist within the MySQL. Information schema, MySQL performance schema. Now we have successfully installed MySQL, and then we executed this query and we see it is working fine. Close this, come back to your project, and now here to integrate a database to this application or ESOP API project, we are going to use the Prisma. So let's go to the website and see what is a Prisma. So this is the Prisma website, and here you can see Prisma is ORM. So what is the ORM? Let's see. So you can see here an ORM, or it stands for Object Relational Mapper, is a piece of software to translate between the data represent used by database and those used in object-oriented programming language. What this means, Okay, so let's go to our project, and you can see we are using the Node.js or TypeScript to write this API endpoint. But if you go to MySQL workbench, and here you can see we executed this query, and this query returns all the database in the MySQL. So you can see this Node.js TypeScript or JavaScript is different from this language that we are using in the database. So we cannot communicate directly with the database using this Node.js ESOP API application. So we use the ORM. It is a software that allows us to interact with the database. And here we are going to use the Prisma ORM. So you can see this is the open source and next generation ORM. And it has a three main parts. First is the Prisma client, which allows us to generate a type-shape query builder for Node.js and TypeScript. And then it has a Prisma migrate. So this Prisma migrate allows us to reflect the changes in database, whatever the changes that we made within the application using the Prisma ORM. Next, here we have a Prisma Studio, a GUI or graphical user interface for viewing the database or all the table within the database. Now, here one thing you need to understand about Prisma ORM, that the programming language that you use to write your application is different from the language that you use in the MySQL, PostgreSQL or other database. So they can't communicate with each other directly. So this Prisma ORM acts as a bridge between the application and the database, allows us to interact with the database seamlessly. Now let's go to our project and set up the Prisma. So here to install the Prisma, specify here npm install Prisma and hit enter. And after installing Prisma, we need to also install the client that allows us to interact with the database. So specify here npm install add Prisma client. So specify here slash and then client, hit enter. Now we have successfully added the Prisma and its client. Now it's time to initialize our project with the Prisma. To initialize our project with Prisma, specify here npx Prisma init and hit enter. As soon as you execute this command npx Prisma init, you can see first it's create a new folder named Prisma containing a file schema.prisma, and second it adds the .env file. But here you don't see that file because we already created this file in our previous sections. So if we remove this one and we execute this command npx Prisma init, then it's create a Prisma folder and .env file. Close this one. And now let's go to here schema.prisma. Here you can see we have two things, a client and database source. Let's go to the website and see how to set up Prisma. Now here go to the get started link and then scroll down, and here choose the database that you want to use. So in this case we are going to use MySQL, so click on MySQL. Now scroll down, we already perform all these steps, so scroll down and click on this connect to your database. You can see here it is saying to connect to the database we need to set the URL field of data source block in Prisma schema. So as we saw in previous, within the Prisma folder we have the file schema.prisma, and you can see it has a two thing, provider and URL. So let's go to the application, and here you can see this is the provider. So by default whenever we run npx Prisma init, it creates a data source for PostgreSQL. But in this tutorial we are using MySQL, so change this one to MySQL. And the next we have the URL. This is the database URL or database URL string. This contains all the information to connect to the database to a specific user. So this database URL is defined within the env file. So let's go to the env file, and you can see this is the database URL. Now here we are using MySQL, so specify here MySQL, and then first thing is specify the username. So in this case the username is root, and then specify the password. So here I have used the simple password. Now after this we need to specify the port or the URL wherever our database is running. So in this case, database is running on localhost, but port is different. Port is 3306. And after this, you can specify the name of the database. So in this case, we have not created any database in our MySQL, but here we will specify ESOP. So the database name will be ESOP, and we don't need to create a new database by going within the MySQL. When we run the Prisma npx command, this will automatically create a ESOP named database in our MySQL. Now we have successfully configured our project to create a new database in our MySQL. So let's execute the command to reflect the changes in the database. To reflect changes in database, specify here npx prisma, then migrate, dev, and name of the initial migration. I'm going to give name as a init. So what is this command? This command npx prisma migrate. So what it does, this command creates a migration file, and that migration file contains the actual SQL query based on the changes that we make within the schema.prisma file. So this is the schema.prisma file where we define the table for our database. We will learn about how to create table soon, but for now let's set up our database or connect to our database. So in this command, you need to always write a npx prisma migrate dev whenever you make changes to this schema.prisma file. And after this, you will specify the name of the migration by specifying option _name. And then here after this, you can specify the name of the migration file that you want to keep. So in this case, I am going to give name as a init, or I can give any name here like ABC. And now after specifying this command, hit enter. And if you see here something like this, MySQL database ESOP created. That means we have successfully created the MySQL database. Let's go to the MySQL and here execute this query show databases. And now you can see here we have the database ESOP. So we have successfully connected our project with the database MySQL. Now let's go to the MySQL and see if any of the table exists in the ESOP or not. So to use the ESOP database, specify query use, and then the database name is ESOP, and execute this query. Now we have selected the ESOP database, and now let's here specify show tables, and then execute this query. And look, this ESOP database contains only one table, which is the Prisma migration. And this Prisma migration is created by the Prisma to store the records of all the migration file that is generated whenever we create or make changes to the Prisma model or anything. So let's go back and let's go to the user controller. And you can see here we have created two controllers, get user and create user. And now these controllers are getting or creating data within the memory, not in the database. As I told you in the previous section, we are temporarily storing the user's information within memory by defining this user object. So we need to store the information within the database table. So for that, we will need to create a table. To create a table in this MySQL ESOP database, go to your schema.prisma file, and within schema.prisma file, we will need to define a model, and that model represents a real table within the database. So to define a model, specify keyword model. And after this, specify the name of the model or name of the table that you want to create within the database. So in this case, it is a user, and then curly braces. And now here, as you know, a database table contains a rows and column. So in model, when you specify a field like ID, then this field represents the ID column within the user table in the database. So here we have defined the ID field, and we will also need to specify the type of this ID field, which means what kind of the data it is going to store. So this is the user ID field, so it is going to store the integer type data. And now, as you know, in the database, ID should be unique, and after this specify add ID property, and next to it specify add default, and within this call the function auto increment. Now what this line means? This line create a ID column of type integer in the database, and it is going to store the default value That means whenever you insert the first user in the user table, that user will be assigned a ID automatically. So when you insert the first user, the ID will be 1. As soon as you insert the second user in the user table, the ID will be 2. You don't need to provide this ID value through your query. This ID will be generated for each of the record or for each of the user automatically, because here we have specified at default, and within this we call the auto increment function, which means automatically increment a number or the value for each of the new record in the user table. A user can also have a name, and as you know, name type can be string. Then user will store the email, and email type is string, and here specify the property unique, which means two user or multiple user can't have the same email address. So this property will make sure or ensure that the two user is not going to have a same email address. If they are going to have same email address, then this will return the error. Now next to it, specify created at, and this means when the user is created, and its type is a date time, because created at is going to store the date time of the user when it is going to create it in the user table. And after this, specify property at default. By default, it is going to execute this now function. So whenever the new user is created within the user table, this function will calculate the current time from the system and store that time in this created at column for that user. So now we have defined our user model within the schema.prisma file, and this model is mapped to the real table in the database containing all the fields like ID, name, email, and created at as the column in the user table. So remember one thing, whenever you add a new model like a different model or you make any changes to this model, you are going to migrate this model. To migrate this model, you are going to run the same command npx prisma migrate dev, and this time we are going to give a different name for this migration file. So here I will say user. This means this migration file for the user, and hit enter. And now here if you see message like your database is now in sync with your Prisma, which means we have successfully created the user table. But as soon as you execute this command npx prisma migrate dev, it creates a migration folder within your Prisma folder. Let's view this one, and you can see it created a migration folder with the username. And before this, we can see this is the date and time of the migration file when it is created. And before this, this is the date and time of the migration file. Now open this migration file and look, this is the exact SQL query, and this kind of query is executed within this SQL query editor. So look how it defines, how it creates the SQL query from model user. And now let's go to the MySQL database, and here again execute the sortable command for the ESOP database by clicking on this icon, and look, you can see the new table user is added to the database ESOP. And to view all the columns of this table, go here, specify the query, select strings from user, and click on this icon, and look, it contains column ID, name, email, and created at, and these are the field within the model user you can see here. So as I told you, whenever we create a new model within the schema.prisma file, that model is the table in your database. And now here you can see this is the migration.sql file. If you copy this one from here and go to your MySQL editor and paste that code here, this code will work fine, because this is the exact syntax of the MySQL that is used to create a table with a different field. So this task is done by a Prisma. We don't need to write whole SQL query to create a table. So we need to only write the model definition here in this schema.prisma file, and all the heavy lifting will be done by the Prisma. So I hope that you understand how the Prisma is working as a bridge between our application and the database. Now we have successfully connected to the MySQL database and created a new user table. So to perform any of the create, read, update or delete operation on this user table, we will need to use the Prisma client. As I told you before, this Prisma client is auto-generated and type-safe query builder for Node.js and TypeScript. So whenever you make a changes to this schema file after applying the command npx prisma migrate, you will also run the command npx prisma generate to reflect the changes in the Prisma client. Now hit enter. It is going to generate a Prisma client with the updated information that we specified within this schema.prisma file. Now we have successfully generated the Prisma client. Next step is to set up the Prisma client. To set up the Prisma client, within the src folder, let's create a new folder and name this services. And within this, create a new file and file name will be prisma client.ts. And here we are going to import the Prisma client. So specify here Prisma client from add Prisma client package that we have installed. And then here we are going to create a Prisma object which is equal to new Prisma client like this. And after this, import this object from this file so that we can use it anywhere in our program. Now here, this object Prisma allows us to interact with the database and execute a CRUD operation. So let's go to the user controller, and within user controller, we are going to remove this one and now come to this get user function. So remove this one, we don't need it anymore, and make this function asynchronous function by specifying async keyword like this. And now here specify try catch block, and within try, first thing we are going to get all the user from the user table. So to get the user from the user table using Prisma, specify const, then users variable to store all the user equal to, then specify await, because whenever a request is made to database, it is going to take some time. So we will await and then specify Prisma, and this is the Prisma object that we have created within this file. So using this Prisma object, we will access the user table, and you can see it shows user table. And after that, call the method find many. So this method is provided by the Prisma, and this method will get all the user or will get all the records from the user table. And then next to it, I'm going to send the response with a status code of 200, and then as a response, I will send all the users. And within the catch, we are going to specify the error that it is going to generate. So here we're going to send the response dot status of 400, and then here we will send the message, and the message will be failed to fetch the users like this. This is how we can interact with the database table using this Prisma object. Now let's also define this create user function to interact with the database and create a new user in the user table. So here I'm extracting the information ID and name from the request body. So here I'm going to remove the ID from here because this ID will be generated automatically in the table. As I told you when defining this schema.prisma, here we have specified auto increment, and from the body we will provide one more information, and that is the email of the user. And after grabbing this name or email from the body, we are going to check if the email or the name does not exist. Then in this case it is going to return email and name is required. Now here I'm going to remove this one and add the logic to interact with the database. So here I'm going to create a new variable const new user, and here call the Prisma object and then accessing the user table, and here call the method create, and this method allows us to create a new record in the user table. Here we will specify the property of the method data, and as a data we are going to send the name and the email of the user, and as a response I'm going to return the new user. So remove this one from here and specify new user. Let's also wrap this logic within the try catch block. So specify here try catch and copy this one from here, paste within the try block, and now within the catch we are going to return the error if any of the error occur. So here specify race.status, and then status will be 400, and this 400 will send the error, and the error will be failed to create a new user. So successfully we have defined our controller get user and create user that creates a new user in the user table in the database, or retrieve all the user from the user table in the database. So here one thing you need to note, whenever you are going to interact with the tables or the database, or you want to perform a CRUD operation, always use this Prisma object. And then as you specify this dot, you will be able to access all the table that exist in the database. So we created only one table in the database, and that table is a user table. So here it is showing only one user table. If you have multiple tables, then it will show all the table here. Then after the table name, you will specify the dot, and then it has a bunch of method that allows us to perform a different query operation on the tables. So in this case, we have used only two of the method. First is the find many. This find many method returns all the record of the user table and stores in this user variable. And then here we have called the create method, and this method takes the property data, and this data is inserted within the user table. And there are many more methods that we will explore in later sections. Now we have successfully integrated the database to our project. It's time to test our API endpoint to create or get user from the database. So first thing, here we need to make some modification to our API endpoint path. Here I'm going to remove this one because we don't need this anymore. And here I'm going to use the path for the user as a /user. And on this path, we will create or get the user from the database. Also, let's go to this user routes, and here instead of a simple slash, I will specify get path. So this means we will get the user, and then here we will specify /create path, which means at this path we'll create a new user. Now open the Thunder client. So in this case, I'm going to open the Thunder client, and from the Thunder client, I'm going to make a new request. Here the first request type will be a post. So post is a HTTP method, and whenever you want to send a data to the server to store in the database, we use the post method. And here specify localhost 3000, then slash, then users, and then here we are going to create a new user. Then we will specify the path as a create. So /user is coming from the path within the index file, and here we have defined /user. And after accessing this path, we are going to access the path /create. So we have specified /create, and here with this request, we are going to send the new user detail. So in this case, specify curly brackets to send the data in a JSON format. And here we need to provide two things. First is the name, and name here is the coding with case, and second is the email. So the email is here coding with ks@gmail.com. And when we click on this send button, then this path is accessed with this information. So in this case, this one is executed. So here we have defined the controller create user, and for this path, this create user controller is called, and then here we have defined all the database logic to create a new user in the user table. So let's go here in the Thunder client and click on send, and look, we get the error connection was refused by the server, which means we have not started our server. So here specify npm run dev to start our server, and as you can see, our server is started. Now again click on this send button, and look, it returns message user created successfully, which means we have created the user coding with KS. Let's go to the database and verify it. This is the user table. So first view the users table, specify here show tables in the MySQL and execute this query. And now here we have the user table. To get all the information from the user table in MySQL, you will specify the query select asterisk means all from, then table name, which is the user in this case, and execute this. Now as we can see here, this table does not contain the inserted user data, but in the Thunder client response, we get this user created successfully. Why this happens? Let's go to the controller and debug it. So in the controller create user, you can see we have specified the correct logic, but there is a mistake. What is a mistake here? We did not make this function async function, which means if you look above here, we make this function async function, and but here we did not make this function async function. So what happens in this case? So whenever you access this API endpoint and this controller is get executed, and immediately it comes to this line, and here this line takes time, so it ignores this and execute this line. So before moving to this line, we need to wait for this database execution or database operation. So to wait for this database operation, we will need to make this function async function, and then here we will specify keyword await, which means wait for the completion of this operation. And then whenever the result is returned by this line of code, that result is stored in the new user. So this is why we need to make every controller or every function as an async function. That function is going to interact with the database, because when the function interact with the database, it is going to take us time to insert data and retrieve data from the database. So the program must wait for the completion of the operation. And also here specify promise, then within this specify any. Now let's go back to this Thunder client, and here we are going to make a request again. Click on send. And now this time we get the new user with the ID 1, name is coding with K, and email is coding with KS and created at timing. Let's go to the MySQL database and again run this query to retrieve the record from the user table. And now this time the new user is inserted in the user table, you can see here. So this is how you can perform the create operation using the Prisma with a MySQL database or any database. Now we have defined one more controller, and this controller is a get user controller, and this user get all the records or all the user in the user table in the database. So in the user routes, we have defined this get router or get route to get all the user from the database. Let's execute this API endpoint. Instead of a create here, specify get and clear this JSON body, and now click on send button. Why we get this error? Because whenever we are sending request, with a request we need to specify that what kind of HTTP method we are sending as a request. So in this case we are sending get, so select get and click on send, and now it is working fine. It retrieves the user from the user table. So we successfully integrated the database to our Node.js application or ESOP application, and then we created a new table using the Prisma model in the database, and after that we defined our API endpoint logic where that endpoint interact with the database using the Prisma client to perform the create or read operation. So I hope that you understand how to do all these things. In the next section, we will learn deeper about the CRUD operation or all these HTTP method like a get, post, put and delete and patch. So at last I want to say don't forget to subscribe my YouTube channel, and thank you.